They built a fence 6 inches onto my land, and somehow, that tiny line ended up costing them more than $100,000. Not because I wanted revenge, but because they decided 6 inches didn't matter, and I decided it did. I bought that corner lot back in late 2019, just outside a small town in Oregon called Millhaven. One of those places where nothing really happens unless someone's dog gets loose or a mailbox gets knocked over by a snowplow. Half an acre, quiet street, mature trees, the kind of place where you can actually hear yourself think at night. Crickets, wind, maybe the distant hum of a pickup on the highway. The land had been sitting empty for years, weeds waist-high, old fence posts leaning like they'd given up a long time ago, nobody really paying attention to it, which, honestly, is exactly why I liked it. No drama, no history, just a clean slate. I wasn't trying to build anything fancy either, just a simple, single-story house. Nothing flashy, something practical, a place I could settle into without feeling like I had to impress anyone. Now, to the east of my lot, that's where the Whitakers lived. Harold and Denise Whitaker. They'd been there a long time. You could tell just by looking at their place. Big two-story colonial, white siding always freshly painted, lawn trimmed like it was measured with a ruler, flower beds lined up perfectly, not a weed in sight. The kind of house that makes you wonder if they vacuumed the driveway. At first, things were normal. Not friendly, not unfriendly, just that polite, small-town acknowledgement. A wave when you pass each other. A nod if you're both outside at the same time. Harold was the type of guy who always wore tucked-in polos, even on weekends, and Denise had this way of smiling that felt more rehearsed than warm. But hey, I wasn't there to make best friends. I just wanted peace. And for a while, that's exactly what I had. Then, sometime in early spring of 2021, things shifted. I remember it was a Thursday. I came home from work a little later than usual, sun already dipping low, and there it was. A brand new fence. 6 feet tall, cedar wood, clean lines, running the entire length of our shared boundary like it had always been there. There was still a crew packing up tools, tossing scrap wood into the back of a truck, the smell of fresh-cut lumber hanging in the air. And my first thought was actually, that looks pretty good. I mean, I get it, privacy matters. Especially out there. And honestly, I didn't think much of it. Not at first. It wasn't until that weekend. Saturday morning, I think. I was out in the yard, just doing basic stuff, clearing brush, checking the drainage near the corner, that something caught my eye. It wasn't obvious. Not like the fence was wildly out of place or anything. But there was this slight misalignment. One of the fence posts looked off, like it didn't quite line up with where I remembered the property boundary running. And that's the thing, when you build on land, you start to get a feel for it. You know where things should be, where they shouldn't. So I walked over, took a closer look, and then I saw it. The survey stake. Still there, same spot it had been since the day the builders marked everything out. Bright orange cap, half buried but clearly visible if you knew where to look. And the fence post wasn't next to it. It was past it, by a few inches. Maybe 6, maybe a little more. Not much, but enough. Enough that once you see it, you can't unsee it. I didn't jump to conclusions right away. I mean, mistakes happen. Maybe I was remembering wrong. Maybe there was a new survey. Maybe I was overthinking it. So I went inside, grabbed the original survey documents from when I bought the place, laid them out on the kitchen counter, traced the lines with my finger like I was double-checking a map. And there it was. Clear as day. That fence wasn't on their side. It was on mine. Now here's where things could have gone 100 different ways. Because 6 inches, it doesn't sound like much, right? You could step over that without even noticing. Most people probably would have just shrugged it off. Let it go. Avoid the hassle. And for a moment, I actually considered doing exactly that. Just ignoring it. Because who wants to start something over 6 inches? But the more I stood there, looking out the window at that fence, the more it started to bother me. Not the space itself, but the idea behind it. They didn't ask. They didn't check. They just built, and then left it there like it was theirs. So I walked over, knocked on their front door. Harold answered. Same tucked-in polo, same neutral expression. Hey, I said, keeping it light. Fence looks good. He gave a short nod. Appreciate it. I paused for a second, then added, I think it might be sitting a little over the line, though. That's when his expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough. A slight tightening around the eyes. He leaned against the doorframe like he was settling in. We had it measured, he said. It's right where it's supposed to be. I nodded slowly. Yeah, I've got survey markers still in the ground from when I built, and the fence crosses them. He shrugged. Actually shrugged. Then maybe your survey's off. Just like that. Like it was nothing. I remember letting out a small breath, trying to keep things from escalating. Do you happen to have a copy of your survey? I asked. He shook his head. Fence company handled it. Licensed surveyor involved. Another shrug. They know what they're doing. And right there, that was the moment everything shifted. Because that answer told me more than anything else could have. I looked past him for a second. Denise was in the background, standing near the kitchen, arms crossed, watching, not saying anything, just observing, waiting. I turned back to Harold. I think we should take another look at this, I said. If it's on my land, it needs to be moved. He let out a small laugh. Not loud, not friendly either. Come on, he said. It's 6 inches. Then he added, with a slight smirk. Who cares? And I don't know what it was about the way he said it. Maybe the tone, maybe the assumption, maybe the fact that he'd already decided the answer for both of us. But something in me just clicked. I do, I said. There was a pause. Just a second. But it felt longer. He straightened up. We already paid for the fence, he said flatly. It's not moving. And before I could say anything else, he closed the door, and I just stood there for a moment, on my side of the fence, looking at something that wasn't supposed to be there, realizing this wasn't going to be simple. I stood there for a while after he shut the door, longer than I'd like to admit. Not angry, not yet, just processing it. Because in my head, I kept thinking, this is fixable. This is one of those small neighbor disputes people sort out over a cup of coffee and a handshake, not something that turns into anything serious. 6 inches. That's all it was. But the way he said it, who cares? That stuck with me more than the fence itself. For the next couple of days, I tried to let it go. I really did. Went about my routine, worked, came home, cooked dinner, sat on the porch in the evenings. But every time I looked out toward that side yard, there it was. That line. That didn't belong to them. And it wasn't just the fence anymore. It was the principle of it. Because if someone can take 6 inches and face no resistance, what stops it from becoming a foot later? Or more? It wasn't about the size. It was about the assumption that it didn't matter. About a week later, I walked the property again, slower this time. Measured from the original survey points. Double-checked everything. And yeah, still the same result. Consistent. Clear. The fence was sitting on my land. Not by accident, but definitely by negligence. And maybe something else. That's when I decided to give them one more chance. Not legal, not formal. Just neighbor to neighbor. I caught Denise outside that afternoon, trimming something along the side of their yard. I walked over, kept my tone calm. Hey, I said. I wanted to follow up about the fence. She didn't smile this time. Didn't stop trimming either. What about it? She asked, like it was already settled. I checked everything again, I said. It's definitely over the line. I'm not trying to make a big deal out of it. I just want it moved to where it's supposed to be. She finally looked up, and there was something different in her expression, not confusion, not concern. More like irritation. You're really going to push this? She said. I blinked. Push what? It's barely anything, she replied. You're making it into something it doesn't need to be. That was the second time I heard that same idea. That I was the problem. Not the fence. Not the mistake. Me. I'm just asking for my property line to be respected, I said. She sighed, long and exaggerated. Harold already told you, she said. We're not tearing down a brand new fence over a few inches. And then she added, quieter this time. Honestly, it feels a little petty. I remember that word hitting me harder than I expected. Petty. Like I was the one crossing a line. I nodded slowly. All right, I said. Then I guess we'll have to figure it out another way. She didn't respond. Just went back to trimming. Conversation over. And for a brief moment, I almost backed down. Because part of me didn't want to be that guy. The difficult neighbor. The one who turns small things into big problems. But then again, they already had. About 2 weeks later, I got something in the mail. Certified. From a law office. And I remember standing there at the kitchen counter, envelope in my hand, thinking, no way. There's no way they escalated this. But they did. I opened it. Read it once. Then read it again slower. And somewhere between the second and third paragraph, I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd. They were claiming adverse possession. Now, if you're not familiar with that term, it basically means someone can claim ownership of land if they've been using it openly, continuously, and without permission for a certain number of years. In Oregon, that number is 10. 10 years, not 2 weeks. But the letter, it didn't care about that detail. It stated that the Whitakers had been maintaining and utilizing the disputed strip of land as part of their property for an extended period of time and intended to assert ownership, which was a lie, a flat-out lie, because before I bought that lot, it had been vacant, untouched, no maintenance, no use, nothing. This wasn't confusion anymore. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was strategy, and that's when something in me shifted, because up until that point, I was still thinking like a neighbor, trying to be reasonable, trying to keep things simple. But that letter, that turned it into something else entirely. So I hired a lawyer. Her name was Rachel Kim. Sharp, no nonsense, the kind of person who doesn't waste time with fluff, and the moment she finished reading the letter, she leaned back in her chair and just smiled. Not amused. More like impressed by the audacity. They're bluffing, she said. Badly. She walked me through it. Explained the requirements for adverse possession, the timelines, the burden of proof, all of it. And none of it applied. Not even close. They don't have a case, she said. But they might think you won't fight it. And that right there, that hit the core of it. Because maybe that's exactly what they were counting on. That I'd see the legal letter, get intimidated, and just give up the strip. Rachel drafted a response. Formal, direct, demanding removal of the fence within 30 days, or we proceed with legal action. We sent it. Waited. 30 days came and went. No response. No attempt to fix anything. Not even a conversation. Just silence. And at that point, there wasn't really a decision left to make. We filed suit. Trespass. Property encroachment. Recovery of legal fees. Once the paperwork went through, things moved quickly. Faster than I expected. They hired a lawyer too. And, I'll put it this way, not all lawyers are created equal. Their argument, if you can call it that, was built around this idea that the fence benefited both properties, that it increased privacy, improved aesthetics, and that I was being unreasonable. Unreasonable. I remember sitting in that courtroom, listening to their attorney say that word, and thinking, this isn't about landscaping. This isn't about curb appeal. This is about ownership. Rachel didn't even raise her voice when she responded. She just laid out the facts. Clear. Precise. No emotion. Property boundaries, she said, are not subjective. And just like that, the tone shifted. The judge ordered a court-appointed survey. Neutral. Licensed. No room for interpretation. We split the cost. Waited for the results. And I'll be honest, even though I was confident, there's always that small part of your mind that wonders, what if I'm wrong? What if this whole thing blows up over a mistake? But it didn't. The survey came back. Detailed. Measured down to fractions of an inch. And the conclusion was simple. The fence Saturday, June 4th inches onto my property. The entire length. No gray area. No ambiguity. No debate. I remember Rachel sliding the report across the table toward me, tapping the page lightly. That's your line, she said. And for the first time since this whole thing started, I felt something settle. Not victory. Not yet. But certainty. Because now, it wasn't just me saying it. It wasn't just old survey markers in the ground. It was official, and there was no way around it. What happened next? That's where things really started to unravel. Once that survey came back, everything changed. Up until then, there was still this thin layer of denial they could hide behind. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe the lines were unclear. Maybe it was just a disagreement between two neighbors. But now it was documented, measured, stamped. 6.4 inches, all the way down. The next hearing felt different. Quieter, but heavier. Like everyone in the room already knew how it was going to end. We were just there to make it official. Their lawyer tried. I'll give him that. He pivoted. Dropped the adverse possession argument almost entirely, like it had never existed in the first place. Instead, he leaned into this idea that the fence was a minor encroachment, that removing it would create unnecessary financial hardship, that compromise would be more reasonable. Compromise. That word again. Rachel didn't even hesitate. She stood up, calm as ever, and said, Your Honor, the only reason we're here is because the defendants refused to correct a known encroachment. This is not a matter of compromise, it's a matter of compliance. No raised voice. No drama. Just clean. The judge looked down at the survey report for a long moment, flipped a page, then another. And then he looked up. The boundary line is not in dispute, he said. That was it. That was the moment. He ruled in my favor, ordered them to remove the fence and rebuild it along the correct property line within 60 days. Simple, direct, final, or at least it should have been, because about a week later, Rachel called me, and I could hear it in her voice before she even said the words. They're appealing. I remember just closing my eyes for a second, leaning back in my chair. Not surprised, just tired, because at that point, it wasn't about the fence anymore. It was about pride. The appeal process dragged things out another few months. Paperwork, filings, waiting, always waiting. But the thing about appeals is they're not about re-arguing the facts. They're about whether something was handled incorrectly the first time. And in this case, everything had been done by the book. So when the decision came back, it wasn't even close. The appellate court upheld the ruling fully, and then added something that, honestly, I didn't expect. They called the appeal frivolous, which, in legal terms, is about as close as a court gets to saying, this should never have been brought here. And because of that, they ordered the Whitakers to cover my legal fees. All of them. I remember reading that line twice, just to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding it. Because up until then, I had been prepared to absorb that cost, chalk it up to standing my ground. But now the entire weight of this decision shifted back onto them. And that's when the real costs started to show. By the time everything was finalized, they'd spent over $40,000 on their own legal representation, another $15,000 covering mine. And on top of that, they still had to move the fence. No shortcuts this time. No guessing. They hired a licensed surveyor, a different fence company, got permits, did everything the way it should have been done from the start. I watched part of it from my kitchen window. Not out of spite, just curiosity. 3 days. That's all it took. 3 days to tear down the original fence, dig new post holes, and rebuild it exactly 6.4 inches over. I remember standing out there on the last day, just looking at it. Same fence, same wood, same height, different line. And I couldn't help but think, all of this for something that could have been fixed in an afternoon. We never spoke again. No more waves. No small talk. Nothing. If we happened to be outside at the same time, we just pretended the other didn't exist. Like two actors in completely different scenes, sharing the same set. And honestly, I was fine with that. I didn't need an apology. Didn't need closure. The line was where it belonged. That was enough. But the story didn't end there. About 8 months later, I noticed a sign go up in their yard. For sale. At first, I didn't think much of it. People move. Life changes. But then I saw the listing price. It was ambitious. Let's put it that way. And for a while, nothing happened. No sold sign. No moving trucks. Just sitting there. Weeks turned into months. Price dropped. Then dropped again. And you could feel it, even without talking to them. That quiet pressure. That slow realization that things weren't going the way they expected. Eventually, it sold. But not for what they wanted. Not even close. I never asked for details. Didn't need to. Because when you add it all up, the legal fees, the cost of tearing down and rebuilding the fence, the loss on the house, that 6-inch decision cost them well into 6 figures. And here's the thing. I didn't win because I was aggressive. I didn't win because I wanted to fight. I won because I didn't back down when something was clearly wrong. And maybe that's the uncomfortable part of this whole story. Because if the roles were reversed, if it had been me building that fence, would I have handled it differently? I'd like to think so. But you never really know until you're the one standing on that line. So I'll leave you with this. At what point does something small stop being small? Is it about the size of the issue or the principle behind it? Because in the end, it was never just 6 inches. It was the moment someone decided it didn't matter and someone else decided it did. And I'm curious what you think. If you were in my position, would you have let it go? Or would you have done exactly what I did? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read more of them than you'd expect. And if you've ever had a neighbor dispute like this, I want to hear that too.